Hey team, and welcome back to the channel. So today I wanted to share with you all something a little bit different. If you remember way back when I did my Picatrix breakdown video, towards the end I talked about how much more I liked and preferred Marcelo Ficino's three books on life, bemoaning, I guess we could say, how much Picatrix has kind of ingrained itself as the foundational text for astrological magic practice. Personally, I feel like Ficino's three books on life does a much better job and has much more to offer people than the Picatrix does. Ficino's work not only brings in astrology and magic, but also astrology and medicine, and has a much more sort of spiritual and holistic health approach to astrology and magic than the Picatrix does, which is kind of just a weird recipe cookbook in my opinion. But I got off track already. I'm 40 seconds into this and I'm already a little bit off track. Anyway, towards the end of that, I sort of played with the idea of doing a similar breakdown with Ficino's three books on life as I did with the Picatrix. But as I kind of started the project, I realized I didn't really want to do it that way. I preferred to do it a little bit more slower pace to give myself time to kind of sink into the material a little bit better, since it's the first time that I've reread the material in probably like 3 years. So instead of that, what I started was a weekly series on the Patreon called Ficino Fridays, where each week we take and we break down, or I break down, in a video or audio format for my listeners, a chapter Ficino, break it down, talk about it, point out the important parts of it, and provide context for it for people who, just aren't familiar, who don't have the familiarity with the subject matters, that I do. And so that's a series that you can get on Patreon. It's free to members. So I would really recommend going and signing up for it for the full, Ficino Fridays. We're currently at chapter 13, I think, out of 72. So this is something that we're going to be doing for a little bit. But for those who don't want to do the Patreon subscription, that's totally fine. And instead, I set it up as like a collection where you can buy the videos either all at once as a collection or individually. They can be individually priced if you're just interested in maybe one or two, just a handful of chapters, not the book that you want a little bit more kind of insight or understanding for. The idea was for it to be sort of like a guided reading, to where each week, you would read the chapter Ficino and then listen to the Ficino Fridays to kind of get some more context or information, if there is any. Sometimes the chapters are pretty clear, pretty short and sweet. But obviously this isn't here just to be an advertisement. You probably noticed the video length is much longer than what you might expect. And so instead what I decided to do was share the first few Ficino Fridays for free, just sort of as a taste of what Ficino Friday holds. So for those who are interested and want to learn more about Ficino, experience Ficino Friday more, recommend going to the Patreon and signing up so you can get that every week as it comes out. Or like I said, if you're just interested in kind of what we've done so far, you can grab the collection or individual videos for that. But yeah, thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the sneak peek at Ficino Fridays. Hey team, and welcome to our first Ficino Friday. This is going to be a series where every Friday we're going to walk through and discuss one chapter of Marsilio Ficino's work, Three Books on Life. If you recall, way back when I did my video on the Picatrix, I mentioned how Three Books on Life was really my favorite book, like at least historical book, that touches on astrological magic, preferring it much more than, say, the Picatrix. And so I wanted to come up with a way for us to sort of walk through this book together, for me to talk about the book in a way that I feel like does it justice, and sort of lets me explain why I prefer various parts of it to Picatrix. And so this was the way that I thought to do it, like a good breakdown. Week by week, we go through each chapter, chapter by chapter, to kind of discuss the high points of it, give my views on it, and then us kind of go together either in office hours or through the comments to talk about and, dig more into any of the chapters that have really fascinating information. So what is this book and who is this author? Well, Marsilio Ficino is an Italian doctor, priest, astrologer, magician, who really encapsulated a really well-written, in my opinion, sort of self-help book about how to use astrology, how to use magic, and how to combine that with various lifestyle choices to promote a sort of healthy, soulful, spiritual living situation. And while the text of Three Books on Life is written sort of specifically for people who suffer from like the melancholic humor, it's sort of jokingly referred to as like the world's first occupational safety book. It was written sort of by Marsilio Ficino to fellow scholars as a way to help them improve their health and improve their lives, as it sort of talks about ways to combat very specific ailments or issues that scholars or people who are predominantly melancholic face. But it doesn't take a whole lot of know-how to sort of reverse engineer similar ideas or similar sort of like prescriptions or regimens for people who are predominant in another humor that may be holding them back or making them unhealthy in some way. So while it is written primarily, like specifically for the melancholic humor, it doesn't take a lot for you to sort of figure out what you can do, what you can change to make it match up like somebody who's suffering from the cleric humor or the phlegmatic humor or an excess of the sanguine humor, which makes it a really nice kind of blueprint on how to go about that. The third of the 3 books on life focuses explicitly on using astrological magic to help you become healthier. So it is in many ways the kind of combination of medicine and magic through the vehicle of astrological magic to improve one's health. So that will be really interesting to dig into when we reach that point. The first 2 books are a little bit more practical, a bit more physically practical, I would say. They don't focus so much on magic, but you can see some of the underlying planetary or astrological themes, which I think is a form of magic, but not like the explicit sort of creation of talismans or the invocations of spirits or things like that. To really understand some of the philosophy or the kind of religious ideas that are influencing Ficino and are coming out in 3 books on life, to kind of get a better sense of those, I would recommend 3 different videos to listen to when you have a chance. The first 2 are from the YouTube channel Let's Talk Religion, one that focuses on the history of Neoplatonism through primarily Plotinus's work. And that'll be really important for understanding what Ficino was talking about. The second is also by Let's Talk Religion, which is about Neoplatonism and Christianity, how Neoplatonic thought sort of shaped Christianity into what it is today. I think that will be very interesting for a lot of people. One, because of how it directly relates to Ficino's view of Christianity and how it has kind of impacted the Christianity that many of us grew up in some capacity. And the third video is by Dr. Angela Puca about Iamblichus and Neoplatonism, which is maybe the least relevant of the 3 to what we're talking about, but I really enjoy Iamblichus's work and his works on theurgy, and we may do a similar thing on Iamblichus's work as we're doing now one day. But even still, Iamblichus's work was very significant for Ficino and what he did in 3 books on life, so it is a great thing to kind of have in the background. So listen to those 3 videos when you have a chance, and they'll help you kind of contextualize a lot of what Ficino is talking about in 3 books. So how did Ficino get to this point? How did he get to writing this book on astrology, magic, medicine, and health? What were his kind of influences? Well, the first thing that I think is kind of interesting to talk about is that Ficino often discusses his natal chart as being like heavily Saturnian influence, and in a lot of ways it is. He's got an Aquarius ascendant with Saturn right on the ascendant, so there's that very strong sense of that Saturn force being brought forward and really manifesting in his body, like in his physical body and how he acts and what he does. Kind of around the time in Florence that Ficino was in his 20s, there was this kind of like schism going on between Eastern and Western Orthodoxy. And so the ideas of Neoplatonism were sort of offered up as a way to maybe mend those, to mend that rift, to kind of bring these 2 forces together a little bit more amicably. And so to do that, Cosimo de' Medici opened up, or sort of reopened, the Platonic Academy, and he put Ficino at the head of it. And as part of that, Ficino would translate the Greek manuscripts of Plato's works into Latin. And then a little bit later, he would also translate the Greek Hermetica. And this happened when Ficino was 29 years old, his first Saturn return, where he, becomes head of this Platonic Academy, and he works to rewrite, to translate, to bring into sort of his modern era the works of Plato in a language that many of the learned individuals can read and access themselves. Then, when he turns 56, he publishes this work, 3 books on life, his second Saturn return. And I think that's a really interesting look at how the different Saturn returns can kind of build up off of one another as sort of like an interpretational tool. And I think it becomes really clear in Ficino because he specifically has a very strong Saturn that is aligned with him. And it doesn't rule his 10th house, of course, it rules like his 12th and 1st. But we see that like strong Saturnian influence coming in, even in like the Saturnian timing to significant moments in his life. Of course, it's actually kind of funny because like 3 books on life is not what a lot of like scholars, a lot of kind of materialistic scholars would describe as one of Ficino's best works, like his most influential works. But I think it's a little interesting that astrology kind of disagrees with that in its sort of like
epical timing of his life, like through the Saturn cycles. So that's kind of an interesting way that Saturn comes out not only in the book Three Books on Life, but also in sort of the life steps that Ficino took to make Three Books on Life, a real thing, to bring it into this world. Ficino was influenced by a lot of different factors. His father was a physician who, of course, trained Ficino, who trained Marsilio to be a physician as well. But due to Marsilio kind of becoming part of the Platonic Academy in his late 20s, it's a little unclear whether he was able to establish a practice on his own or if he just sort of worked with his father until such time as he was pulled away by the Medicis to head this particular thing and translate these works. Those works that he's translated, of course, had a profound impact on his sense of religion, on how he practiced religion, how he thought about religion and God, which then sort of became wrapped up in of course, his ordination into the Catholic priesthood. Then we have sort of the magic come in through the works of Imblicus and his works on theurgy, and of course the astrology of it all, probably likely due to the influence of Porphyry, who was a Neoplatonic philosopher but also an astrologer who wrote a treatise on that as well. So we have this really interesting, this really unique life, and these really interesting forces that kind of work to shape this life to bring about Three Books on Life into being, and how it focuses on the astrology of Porphyry, the magic of Imblicus, the religion of the Neoplatonists, and the medicine of his father. It's a really kind of interesting combination there. But as for Ficino Fridays, they are going to be a segment that releases on Fridays, hopefully very regularly, where we will talk about one chapter per week. There will be some chapters where I'm sure I have a lot to say, and other chapters where I don't have a lot to say or are very short. But we're going to try to keep the 1 week to one chapter flow of it all. There are 72 chapters in Three Books on Life across all three books. Of course, there is 6, the number of the sun, times 12, the number of zodiac signs, equals 72. What a shock. I was not surprised at all when I was counting the chapters to see how many there were. But so this will span about 72 weeks, and I do plan on it being a basically Patreon exclusive. So if you join a little bit late, make sure to catch up. But I hope to do it in such a way that where you can jump in sort of whenever you have time, whenever you really, whenever you have time, whenever you notice this, to be able to kind of follow through and read along with the book as you choose. Three Books on Life is available on Amazon. I think it's like a 2018 reprint of the original translation. But if you are unable to get it, then please reach out and I can most likely send you the PDF version of it, which is what I used when I first read it years ago before that edition came out. But if Three Books on Life is a book that you've already had, or a book that you've had in the back of your mind that you haven't been able to crack open, that you haven't been able to get into, hopefully this is your sign that the universe is aligned for you to be able to get into and explore it. And I hope that you enjoy it and are able to take as much meaning out of it as I have, hopefully more than I have. And we're able to have a really great time with this project together. But thank you all so much, and I will see you next Friday for Chapter 1.
Hey team, and welcome back. Welcome to our first sort of official Ficino Friday. We're going to dive into it and talking about the first chapter of Book 1. Now, we have to remember that Vita Three Books is divided into 3 different titles. It's 3 different titles. And our first one, Book 1, is on a healthy life. So in this book, Ficino is really focused on delivering information about how to live in a healthy way. So this is a little bit more about lifestyle choices, diet, exercise, things like that. We'll see astrological allegory and things like that kind of sprinkled here and there. But it's something that is sort of building up. Book 1 sort of builds up to, of course, Book 3, which tackles more specifically obtaining life from the heavens, or using sort of astrological powers to help maintain or enhance one's lived experience. So in our first chapter, Ficino is talking to us about what it is that any human needs to be successful in their sort of intellectual, artistic, creative, or personal pursuits. He kind of makes an allegory here about it being the temple of the muses. So the muses, of course, are the collection of goddesses who represent various forms of culture, poetry, art, astronomy, songs, things like that. And while there are different sort of accounts of how many muses exactly there are, some say 3, it's really 9 that became kind of the standard version of muses that kind of carried on throughout history. That sort of became the dominant tradition concerning the muses. And so Ficino leans into this and he says that there are 9 guides that every scholar needs. 9, of course, being kind of a Pythagorean numerological kind of thing. With, of course, you have 3 threes, 3 trinities, a trinity of trinities, making a whole, complete, fulfilled 9. It's kind of the Pythagorean thing that we're working with here, Pythagorean ideas. And so these 9 guides, these 9 figures that every human being needs in their life to be, a successful human being, are divided into 3 trinities. We have the trinity that exists in the heavens, that we get from the heavens, the trinity that comes from the soul, and the trinity that comes from earth. And I think this sort of plays into, or, illuminates, kind of among other things, the sort of tripartite worlds, the 3 sort of worlds of magic that became, I don't know if codified is a great word, but sort of became the basis for how Cornelius Agrippa would talk about magic. This would come, of course, after Ficino's time, where we have the natural world, the celestial world, and this, like, the spiritual or the super celestial world. So I think that's kind of what we're leaning in here, or this sort of like neat division of threes, sort of onto this metaphysical kind of cosmology. Anyway, of the 3 that are in the heavens, we have the planet Mercury, who Ficino talks about as impelling or extorts us, so we should undertake the journey in search of the muses. So we have Mercury, and Mercury operates more as like our intellectual curiosity. You need to have a question, and you need to have the drive to be able to have that question answered, or you need to have sort of that intellectual spark, that musing, that curiosity, that inquisitiveness that gets the ball rolling. If you don't have that, then there's no sort of like examination to ever be had. So if you don't have this good sense of curiosity, of wondering why things are the way they are, or how they could be different, you need that to be successful. Next, we go to the sun, who Ficino calls Phoebus a lot throughout this text. So if you see the word Phoebus, that name, we mean the sun. And the sun is there to illuminate. Ficino says, Phoebus, who so illuminates the seeking souls and the things sought with copious light. So not only do you need the curiosity, the inquisitiveness of Mercury, the fine, in Hellenistic astrology, Robert Schmidt, he talks about how Mercury's primary nature is to contest and to destabilize. And I think about that a lot when it comes to like Mercury and curiosity, kind of like testing the limits of something, probing something, to try to see at what point does something stop being what it is, and sort of forcing us to further define things, to create these sorts of well-maintained areas, these well-maintained sort of intellectual barriers, to help us define things more clearly and understand things more clearly. As a result, the sun comes along afterwards and gives us the ability to illuminate that, to be able to find that information, to be able to find our answer. Having a question isn't good enough if you can never find an answer. And so that's where the sun comes in. Not only does the sun help to illuminate evidence, to help illuminate what we're looking at and what we're looking for, but the sun also represents, our conscious ability to understand, to take in, and to accept in many ways the information that we find. So Mercury gets you going, it gives you that spark. It's like, I wonder I wonder why this is. The sun is your ability to sort of research and find the information that you're looking for, and the ability to kind of take it in, to accept it, and to understand it, to understand why that's an answer to your question, or, alternatively, why the information that you found is maybe not the answer to your question. The third gift from the heavens, the third guide from the heavens that every scholar needs, is Venus. And this one I think is really interesting and kind of starts to build up the worldview that Ficino has, because we don't normally think about Venus when it comes to like scholarship or learning, because that's not really her thing, right? That's not really what she's there for. But the reason why we include Venus, Ficino says, gracious Venus is added, the mother of the graces, and with her all bountiful and joyful rays, she so enhances and adorns the material, that whatever both by Mercury's instigation has been sought, and by Phoebus's showing has been found, is invested with Venus's wonderful and health-giving charm, and always delights and profits. And I think this is kind of cool, because it sets up a stage of like a reward cycle, kind of. So Mercury, like I said, is that investigative, inquisitive, curious spark. What is the question we need answered? We got to get moving. Like, we got to get pulled to action by this sense of, I need to know this information. The sun comes along and says, here's the information. Here, I'm going to help you find it. I'm going to shed light onto these dark questions, onto these dark things that you have. Here's the information that you're looking for, and also I'm going to help you kind of assimilate this into your consciousness to understand why it fits. And then Venus comes in, and she's like the sense of joy or relief or excitement that you've experienced that kind of that follows that sort of eureka moment, for when you have found the answer to your question, or you've found new information that maybe doesn't answer your question but leads to something greater. And so I just think this is really kind of fun of like, ask a question, find an answer, be excited that you found an answer. And that's something that I can relate to, and I hope that you can relate to some extent as well, in various research projects that I've done. Just trying to like that cycle of, how did this get started? Oh, this seems like it's the answer to it, and then you finally put it together, and that's it. And you're like, oh yes, this is great. Oh, I love this. And sort of that excitement, that joy, from Venus, I think is a really interesting fit, because he could have put anybody here, right? He could have put like Saturn or somebody here, which would have made sense in more of like a structural level. But Venus, I think, is a really fun touch of like the reward that keeps you going to ask the next question. The three guides from the soul are a bit less cool because they're just like, faculties of the mind. And this is probably something we'll come back to, and I'll probably save it to come back to a bit later. The sort of medieval or Renaissance conceptualization of the mind and how the different parts work. I'm sure we'll circle back to it in some other parts of the text. But just to kind of cap this off, Ficino says you need a fierce and firm will. So you have to have like the mental stamina to go for it. The sharpness of intelligence. You have to have a certain amount of like book smart. You have to have a certain amount of like intelligence, so some sort of intelligence to help you understand what you're doing, how to do it. That's just the way it is. And then finally, you need a tenacious memory. He says you need to be able to hold on to the information that you have, to be able to call upon it or use it later, of course. And what's neat about these three things, is that they aren't. Ficino doesn't talk about them as if they're like inherent to an individual, right? These are skills that can be built. You can work on your will. You can work on your determination, your dedication. You can work on your work ethic. Like that's something you can work on. Your intelligence. That's something that you can shape to a certain extent. Everybody has kind of like a natural aptitude, but you can push yourself. And then actually I think the next one, the tenacious memory, I think that's probably the hardest one to build up on, to work on. But that's what notes are for. That's why we have note cards. That's why I have all these little papers that I keep for all the notes that I take, because I don't have that. That's something I don't have. The final trinity, the trinity of like the earth, is, he says, a prudent father, a thoroughly accredited teacher, and a thoroughly experienced physician. And this is more to do with like your earthly guides, the people who are supposed to be here on earth to help you kind of like move through into maturity, or kind of take care of you, help you take care of yourself. After that, a parent, a father, is meant to kind of raise you and protect you and kind of be your kind of moral guide. A teacher is supposed to help teach you things, help teach you how to be a productive member of society, and then the physician is supposed to be there to help keep you healthy. So you kind of have this idea of like, care and raising of the soul from the parent, care and raising of the mind from a teacher, and care and raising of the body, essentially, from the physician. And I think what's interesting here, there's a lot that we can kind of dig into here, and we're going to. But what I think is interesting here is that he goes on, he says, God, omnipotent, and nature, indeed, assigned the other guides to us from the beginning. The last three, however, our own efforts summon. And I think that's really interesting because, the idea of like parenthood, that's kind of the big one that we focus on, the father. Obviously, it makes sense that like a teacher is something that you have to go find. You have to go find a teacher. You have to summon that person up from your will. A physician, a doctor, or some sort of like health guide, is another one you have to go and you have to seek out. But like your nature gives you a father, right? Like that's just something that nature that like you have to be alive. But this thing here, this idea here, that Ficino says that these last three, including the father, have to be summoned up by your own will, indicate to me, to the reader, that he's not talking about your natural father. He's not talking about your biological father. What he means more in line with is like a mentor of some sort. And he goes on and he talks about what it is that like the duties, the responsibilities of the father and the teacher and things like that. And he talks about like Plato and the Republic and the Laws and Aristotle in his Politics. And I think this is one that's actually kind of interesting because Plato kind of famously in the Republic talks about how he doesn't believe in like parental rights. Like he doesn't believe that parents should raise their children, that natural parents should raise their children. He believes that like in this system of government that he lays out, he advocates for all children being raised by the state as wards of the state for a couple of different reasons. One is that not all parents are equal, obviously, and it is a way to kind of give all children a sort of equal footing, but also to keep the state from becoming corrupt by like nepotism or passing favorable laws for your children or kind of establishing like familial political dynasties. So it's weird to hear Ficino be like, who has good ideas about how to be a good father? Plato. That's a good one. And so in Aristotle's work, in his Politics, he lays out a system that's sort of based on the idea of friendship. And to Aristotle, a sort of perfect friendship is a friendship between equals. They're equals socially, they're equals economically, and they can kind of give and take equally from one another. And a lot of the relationships in Aristotle's Politics are kind of based off this, kind of how far does each relationship sort of deviate from from a perfect friendship, and how does that affect it? How can we bring it back? And so between like father and child, it's not a perfect friendship. Like it can never be an equal friendship because a child can never be equal to an adult, both in terms of like rationality, in terms of like maturity, but also in terms of like, according to Aristotle, what a father has given their child, which is basically like the gift of life, right? So how do you pay that back? How does a child pay that back? Well, you honor your father. Like, you honor your father, and in a way he makes the analogy of like how adults honor the gods, a child should honor their father, which is not a great look. Like it's not a great idea. As many of us who have difficult relationships with our parents in general can attest to, it's not a great plan. And like taking a bit more of a pessimistic view, like I didn't have to be born, right? Like why do I have to honor somebody who forced this, this state of being upon me? Like not a great look. I don't want that. So that's a bit more of a pessimistic reading. I don't think Aristotle was prepared for that. But the idea is that the father is the individual who is supposed to be there to guide the child morally, and the child, pays the father back by being by honoring the father in some way. Now, Ficino and his little aside here, his sentence here that indicates that it's up to us to sort of find our own fathers, means that it's not our biological parents that are the ones who necessarily shape us the way that we need to be shaped. And so it's not that we need to follow our parents. It's not that we need to honor our fathers. It's that we need to go and find our own mentors, those people who can be that sort of moral figure for us, whoever that is. And that the quality of that relationship, the quality of that mentorship that we go and we find is an important guide for us here on earth. So the father, the mentor, shapes our kind of moral soul characteristics. The teacher shapes our mind, and the physician helps shape our bodies to keep our bodies intact. And that's just sort of the breakdown of that kind of structure. Ficino kind of closes out the chapter with a bit of a pun about Minerva and how the Latin... It's much more clear if you check the Latin page, the Latin transliteration on the other side of the page in the book, where it's like Minerva, Minersus nervos, which is like Minerva of the weakening nerves. So there's a little bit of a pun there. Don't read too deep into it. Reading at it, it's easy to be like, oh, Minerva, what's that mean? It's just a pun. And then it's kind of like a call to action. It ends with a call to action, like rise up, young people and mature people enervated by too fierce pursuits. So it's like if you're young still, if you still have a certain youth of body, there's still time for you to go ahead and fix this and get this right, so that you can live a long life, so you can live a healthy life, and so you can be successful in obtaining long life for the heavens. And so that kind of closes out our first chapter. It's a really nice kind of guide about how to think about the different powers that shape us as humans, and the different influences and how they propel us to be successful in different ways. Hopefully, you've got all 9 of those here. Hopefully, you have all 9 of these guides in your life to help you be successful scholar of astrology and of magic and whatever it is that you're excited about. That gives you, that whatever it is your passions are. I'm realizing now that Ficino forgot one. There's actually a 10th guide that you need. And it's a cat. Everybody needs a cat. So get you one if you don't have one. Get you 15 if you get you 15 if you need more. If you need to make sure. So make sure you've got your Mercury, your Sun, your Venus. Those are important. Make sure you've got your will to succeed and to do. Make sure you've got your memory to hold on to information. Make sure you've got whatever that third thing was in the soul. I've forgotten already because I don't have very good memory. Make sure you've got a good mentor to help you solve life's conundrums. And make sure that you've got, a good doctor. That's a hard one, especially, that's a hard one. And then make sure you've got a good teacher. And then a cat to top it all off. The most important, the 10th hidden thing, the 10th hidden guide. And we'll be back next week to talk about Chapter 2, what diligent care we should take of the brain, the heart, the stomach, and the... Hey, team, and welcome back to another Friday, another Ficino, same cool hat that I feel like I wear differently each time. But today we're going to talk about Book 1, Chapter 2 of Marcelo Ficino's 3 Books on Life, what diligent care we should take of the brain, the heart, the stomach, and the spirit. And this chapter starts off pretty easy with like a metaphor about how different professionals take care of their bodies, essentially. Runners take care of their legs, athletes, their arms, musicians, their voices. So especially people who are in these more physically demanding professions, their livelihood is dependent upon taking care and getting the most out of these body parts as they can. They're not here just to grind them down to dust, get everything they can out of them. The idea is to have some sort of like longevity to it. And he goes on to talk about how, but unfortunately, scholars need to have similar concerns for their brain, their heart, their liver, and their stomachs. And he goes on to talk more about like how even craftspeople take care of their tools. Painters take care of their paint sets, coppersmiths their hammers and those things. But that it's only scholars, it's only like people who are involved in academia, in intellectual pursuits, who don't seem to have the same sort of awareness of how to take care of these parts of their body that will help them live longer, help them live healthier lives, so that they can continue their studies and, of course, provide to society essentially through their experiments or through what they're learning is kind of the idea here. The better you take care of your brain, heart, stomach, and your spirit, the longer you'll live, the healthier you'll live, and the more of your life you'll be able to devote to your studies, and who knows what good that will make in the world. And he goes on and he says, the instrument of the scholar is the spirit. And when we're talking about spirits here, we're not talking about, no, you all deserve to hear about this from a professional. So we're going to go and we're going to get Dr. Cinnamon Swirl to tell you about Greek medical theories that Ficino's talking about.
Hey team, so I know you were all really excited for and expecting Dr. Cinnamon Swirl to lecture for you on this topic. Unfortunately, he's not able to make it, so I have to substitute in. There's been an incident, and you guys deserve to know. Dr. Cinnamon Swirl is in prison for harassment and assault. He wants you to know that he seemingly shows no signs of remorse. Authorities report as he was being put into prison, he yelled out, "She had it coming!" So more on that story as it develops. But it's fine. I'm perfectly capable of telling you guys about Greek medical theory. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm just kidding, it's me. Could you imagine if everything had turned off and on as I clapped? Y'all would have been plucked. Would have known what to do. Also, I want you to know I don't have a pointer, so I have to use a cat toy, which may be the most on-brand thing that I've ever done. Just a little, but I'm going to use the stick, so we'll see how well this goes. All right, so in this chapter, Ficino talks about the spirit. But one thing that's important to note is that Blossom's down here, just what are you doing with that thing? One thing to note is that usually when we talk about spirits, we're not talking about ghosts or celestial spirits or things like that. Medical spirits are very specific things that kind of power internal bodily processes. So these different medical spirits, which are not ghosts, they begin externally. They start externally or are sort of powered by an external factor and an internal factor. The external factor is the air that we breathe. In Greek medical theory, the air contains a sort of divine essence that's referred to as pneuma. And it is just sort of this like divine energy, this life energy that floats around in the air around us. And you might see, you could easily see parallels between this and like the Chinese concept of qi or the Indian concept of prana. But the idea is that this external divine source, we breathe it in through our noses and our mouths, and it goes to our lungs, where our lungs sort of give it to our hearts. And the idea is that like the heart is our sort of internal divine self, and this internal divine spark combined with this external divine fuel, this combines to create this sort of energy source that then shoots out all along the body and allows the body to do kind of its different processes. So this sort of vital heat that comes from this combination, it goes to the stomach as ignis, where it helps us digest our food. It radiates throughout our body as thymos, which is kind of like our immune system to a certain extent. And it just kind of goes out and does several different things. But all medical spirits within the body begin in this combination of the external divinity in pneuma and the internal divinity of our hearts coming together. We'll briefly talk about all of this different medical spirits because I think it's important to lay out, but one of the more important ones that Ficino talks about obliquely is the vegetative spirit. And this is the spirit that resides in the liver or is housed in the liver, and it is responsible for the sort of physical growth, development, and maturity of an organism. So kind of the growth from infant to childhood to adolescence to adulthood and all of the like a rigmarole that entails is governed by the liver. Part of this process is the development of the four humors, which are created partly by the air that we breathe, but primarily through the food that we consume. So in Greek medicine, you eat your food, nom nom, isn't that delicious, Cookie Monster it. And there are four different processes of digestion, which is basically just a fancy word for like transformation. We're not going to talk about all of them, but the first digestion is the digestion that takes place kind of in your mouth and saliva as you turn like a hamburger or a cookie, I guess, since we're going to keep going with Cookie Monster, as you turn a cookie into kind of mashed up cookie juice, which is referred to as chyle. Then this chyle goes into your stomach where it's digested further, and it is sent allegedly through the hepatic vein the hepatic portal vein, yes. Where then the liver takes this cookie juice, this chyle, and transforms it into blood, which is a combination of the four humors. So your blood contains, all four of the humors of blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. The exact quantities or mixtures of these four humors is going to depend on a few factors. The pneuma that you take in to power this, but primarily it's influenced by the food that you eat, like what food that it is. And this is what Ficino, this whole process here is what Ficino is talking about when he mentions the blood is made by that natural power which flourishes in the liver and the stomach, the vegetative spirit, which is housed in the liver, which has to do with the production of the four humors, which then go out through the body to power the body or to help facilitate particular processes of the body. The next medical spirit we're going to talk about is the vital spirit. And this is really just this is basically the cardiovascular system, the vital spirit. The idea that your body heat, the blood flow, your circulation is powered by the vital spirit, the combination of the pneuma and the heart power to propel blood to the extremities of your body. Where in the Greek medical system, classically, the idea was that the four humors were consumed by the body to make new tissues, to make new cells of the body, essentially, to repair itself or to continue to produce itself. But now, of course, that's not true. Blood flows out and then back in to the heart, just kind of like the circulation of blood. But that's kind of the idea of the vital spirit. It is the ability for the heart to properly transport blood to the extremities of the body in a healthy and safe manner. Issues with the vital spirit can be like, cold extremities, poor circulation, a low, high blood pressure can also be issues with vital spirit. The third spirit that we want to talk about is the psychic spirit. And this is the combination of pneuma in the air with the processes of the brain. Now, the psychic spirit is not necessarily associated with like how we think. It is more about consciousness. The psychic spirit is how the soul interacts with the body. And this is like an important part that I actually forgot to mention and should have covered earlier. I said before that the spirits are not like ghosts. They're not like spooky ghosts or things like that. Within the medical system, spirits are particular ways that the consciousness interacts with the body. And this is following up on Platonic ideas about the separation of the body and the soul. So the basic premise of this from like a Platonic standpoint is you have the body, which is made of material substances, and you have the soul, which is made of immaterial substances. They have nothing in common, so the soul cannot directly interact on the body. But we know through like lived experiences that this isn't necessarily true, that there has to be some way for this to work. And the idea of spirits as an intermediary was sort of provided, like this is sort of the explanation. The idea is that the soul and the body are so opposed to one another, they're so opposite, they're so different, that they can't really interact with each other. But there's this secret third thing, the spirit, which is kind of halfway between the two. It is a physical spirit and it is a spiritual physical presence. And this is where like we see this come out a lot in like Christianity with the Holy Spirit. The idea is that you have like the Holy Spirit is the mechanism by which God works miracles on earth, and kind of playing to that same Platonic idea. God is the spiritual concept is so far removed from like the physicality of the earth. He needs the Holy Spirit to be able to work with the earth. Heretical, like people don't like that nowadays. We also see this within like astrology and divination, where you have the idea of like the gods are so far removed from humans that we need the daimon as the intermediary spirits to kind of work between and help us connect with the gods. But we also see it in kind of like standard astrological lore, where the planets are considered this like these spiritual things, these spiritual kind of vortices. Basically, they have difficulty interacting with the world, with like the physical earth. But the moon, who kind of fulfills the spirit role, she is the most physical of the spiritual planets because she experiences phases. She's the one who's most impacted by the physical world of generation and corruption, that she experiences these phases. So her kind of halfway point between this is what allows her to be the translator of human experiences and human prayers to the planets, and then the planets' answers and influences are precipitated down to earth through the moon. So I should have mentioned that all earlier to make a lot of this make more sense, and I apologize. But there you have it. And so we see this really much more clearly in the psychic spirit. The psychic spirit, like I said, is the combination of like pneuma and the vital heat as it affects the brain. And it's not necessarily about like how we think. There's something else that handles that. There's something else separately that handles that. But the psychic spirit is basically our consciousness. It is how our soul interacts with our body, our sense of perception and self. But also the source of our powers of imagination, and our internal monologue. So the psychic spirit is important, or it is it is set over, it is the thing which empowers your ability to, it is the voice inside your head when you think about thinking. So like it's the voices that you hear when you think, your kind of own internal monologue. And it's also your mind's ability to see images with your mind's eye. So the psychic spirit is important for like, internal thought processes, thinking things through and having that sort of audible voice. It's also important for like imagination, being able to see images in your head and kind of recall memories as sort of like mental pictures and sounds. And that's the purpose of the psychic spirit. But the spirit that Ficino talks about most is the animal spirits. And these are not like the spirits of cats and dogs and things like that. That was, you saw the shadow of Blossom as she walked over it. Thank you, those are good. She knew her cue. They're not the spirits of like actual animals. Today we would think of the animal spirit as being most closely associated with the nervous system. So the animal spirit is essentially how the body interacts with external and internal stimuli. And so the nerves are the best way to think about this. We feel pain, we feel pressure, we feel pleasure, and our body's ability to feel that and then communicate that mentally to the brain is the sort of job of the animal spirits. So the animal spirit is associated with sensory perception. The animal spirit is controls the things that the sense of touch, the sense of smell, the sense of taste, the sense of whatever the other two are, sight and fucking hearing. That's the other one. God, this is what the animal spirit does. It kind of helps us to perceive stimuli through various different methods. One of the other really important jobs that the animal spirit has is what's called the common sense. So you have your five senses and then you have your common sense. And today we think of the common sense as like a baseline intelligence or context or like processes that people should know. They're like, oh, they don't have any common sense because they make like a stupid choice or something like that. But within Greek theory, within like Greek medical theory, the common sense is actually your mind's ability to take in all the different sense perceptions that the body is experiencing and combine it into one common picture or one common experience that interweaves all five of the senses. So the idea is like, oh, you're out shopping, you come out of the store and it starts to rain. Well, your senses feel the rain or experience the rain differently. You have your sense of touch, which will feel the rain as it hits maybe your head or, your skin. Your sense of hearing will hear the rain as it hits the ground. Your sense of smell will smell the rain or like the earth as the rain kind of pushes it up. And your sense of hearing will hear the rain. Maybe you even taste the rain if you happen to like look up with your mouth open or something. But your common sense is what is supposed to pull these different experiences together and make your brain go, oh, it's raining. And then you like run to your car or whatever. But that's the job of the common sense. So this has been sort of your Greek medical theory 101 about the combination of the different spirits and what their functions are in the body. We'll talk about these more in depth throughout different chapters of Ficino, I'm sure, as he mentions different parts of it to kind of explain more. But I wanted to make this clear now so that you'll have that information moving forward if you read it, like if you decide to read further yourself. What does he mean when he's talking about a medical? What does he mean when he's talking about a spirit in this context? Where do these come from? What do they do? Well, this is what they do.
So that's kind of the basic idea that we're talking about here, and why towards the end Ficino says, like, this undoubtedly the contemplation is usually as good as is the compliance of the sense. The sense is as good as the spirit is as good as the blood, and those three forces which we mentioned, the natural, the vital, and the animal. So what he's talking about is like your ability to think, your ability to study, your ability to have these kind of like deep philosophical, intellectual, or spiritual experiences is directly tied to how well your spirits are functioning, which is itself tied to like the purity and the quality of your blood. And I always feel a little like I always kind of shudder whenever I have to say that phrase, purity of blood, because it's hard to talk about blood purity without it sounding like really weirdly racist. But here it's more about like your blood, the quality of your blood is determined by the efficient combination, the efficient and high quality combination of the four humors within your blood. And that goes on to directly impact the rest of your body. If you have poor quality blood because you've eaten poor food, you're not exercising right, you're not taking care of yourselves right, your body's not going to function right. So it becomes more about nutrition essentially than anything else. Whereas on the other hand, if you're eating good foods, if you're exercising and taking good care of yourself, then you're going to have more energy. Hopefully you should live longer and like have more healthy years essentially. And that all stems from like what you eat and how you take care of yourself. Within astrological magic, this is why I kind of harp a bit on Arcturus, who I think is a little underutilized a lot, because the way the text reads it is it's just like for blood diseases essentially. And so for people who are interested in astrological magic but don't have this background in Greek medicine, they're just like, oh, so it's just good for blood diseases. But no, like the blood is key to a radiant, healthy living. So with Arcturus as a talisman, it's useful for helping to have that better liver production, which makes better humors, which makes better blood, which allows you to have that like healthy glow, that radiating energy about you. So that kind of aside there. But yeah, this Ficino Friday, hopefully you learned a bit more about the medical spirits, how these come together to inform the way that Greek medicine thought about the body, how it deeply impacts astrology and medical astrology, and it will carry us. This understanding will carry us through the rest of Ficino's book 1, at least, which focuses on a healthy life. So we'll see a lot of these kind of like Greek health ideas pop up. So getting to talk about them now is great, and we will circle back to a lot of them and probably introduce more concepts as well as we move on to future chapters. And hopefully, Dr. Cinnamon Swirl will have come out of his prison and be able to talk with us later about other medical concepts. But everybody take care, and I will see you next Friday for Ficino Fridays.